As you already know, today chance to be involved in fatal aircraft disaster as low as about 1 to 15 millions. But this does not give any relief with fear of flying. Why? Our brain has two hemispheres, a left brain and the right one. The left is in charge of rational, logical thinking and, in fact, for all our knowledge, understanding and awareness. In order to understand statistics, we need our left brain. The right is responsible for emotions, feelings, instincts, and so on. So, today we know that when someone suffers a phobia, any phobia, not just aerophobia, the response to that stimulus, in this case an airplane, mostly comes from the right side of the brain. That's the problem. The right side cannot think logically. It cannot process facts or draw conclusions. The right side only conjures images. So, a person with aerophobia imagines pictures. In this course, we will learn how to switch from the right side of the brain to the left. We will learn how to ensure that when we think about airplanes, we use the left side of the brain. So, why amazing statistics of air safety doesn't work? Why risks which are as low as 1 to millions fails to give us relief from this phobia? The problem, when you have aerophobia, is that you do not think about millions. Thinking rationally, with the left side of the brain, we'd see 1 in 100 as a high risk, 1 in a million is a remote possibility, and 1 in 10 millions is very remote, and 1 in 100 million would be more distant still. But someone who suffers from aerophobia doesn't see the 10 million, he sees the other figure, the 1. It doesn't matter if the odds are 1 in 10, 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10 billion. It's always the same figure that grabs the attention of the right brain. We don't analyze the situation properly. We only see the 1 person dying, not the 15 million who not. And our right brain says, it might be me. It just forgets that me can occur in any other circumstances, not exclusively on board. Another reason why statistics doesn't work is our behavior. Often people with flying phobia have some avoidance, not flying at all, not flying if possible, not flying for long flights, drinking alcohols, and so on. Also, other spatial behavior used by fearful flyers should be strong enough to beat any logical thinking. The point is, if you do something, for example, checking weather before flight, looking for safety record of the aircraft, and so on, it is stronger than if you think something. For example, flying is safe, statistics is great, and so on. That's why, basically, statistics of air safety wouldn't bring any relief to your flying phobia. Now, I want us to do a very important exercise. Something that will demonstrate perhaps the greatest, if not the most important reason behind aerophobia. You'll need a pen and a paper for this, and I'd ask you to do what I am doing now on your own sheet of paper. So, let's draw up a notional scale of risk. At the bottom of the scale, write 0% risk. Up there at the top, please write 100% risk. I'd remind you that this scale is absolute. That means that 0% risk is something in life that absolutely guarantees the safety of everyone who does it. Since this is an absolute scale, it means precisely that. If 100 people do this, none of them will die. If 1 million people will do the same thing, none of them will die. Now, I want you to think about something that comes with absolutely zero risk, something that people do from time to time in their lives that presents no risk at all. Can you think about anything? If you have a suggestion, the chances are that you are wrong. It's hard to imagine that nobody in a group of billion people might die doing this. People often say things like sitting at home or sleeping in the bed, but we are talking in absolute terms. So out of the billions of people on Earth right now, we know that several billions are currently asleep in their beds. And it's obvious that some of them won't wake up again. So people are dying from this. When you take a broader view, you realize that there is no such thing as zero risk. So I'd ask you to write down here next to 0% risk the words "no such thing." This is a big problem when dealing with aerophobia. People say, how can I not be afraid when it's always possible that a plane will crash? So they are asking for zero risk, asking for the impossible. Any attempt to guarantee zero risk in aviation is about the same, since nothing in this life gives us total security. Now, let's think about something that guarantees a 100% fatality rate. What process could be like that? Something that ensures that if 1 million people do it, 1 million will die as a result. If 1 billion do it, then 1 billion die, and 100 billion means 100 billion deaths. It's not easy to come with, but let me help you. How about a well-planned suicide? Someone takes the poison, then jumps from a tall building. Okay, if 1 million people do so, surely 1 million will die. Don't forget that our scale is absolute, from absolute 0 to absolute 100%. Here, nobody out of all those millions died, and there, every one of those millions was killed. In the middle of your scale, mark 50% and put in 25% and 75% as well. Now, think about this scale and mark the point that corresponds to the risk of driving your car from New York to Washington, D.C., for example. Remember, you are the person doing the driving. Now, I want you to think about this point. Most of people who have answered this question for me put the point here at about 5 to 10%. I guess you'll say roughly the same. Now, mark the point that corresponds to the risk of flying on an all Chinese-operated and Soviet-built Yak-42 plane on a day when it's heavy snow and wind. Don't forget that your plane was built in 1978. To start with, mark a point on your scale that corresponds with the risk of flying on that Yak-42. Then mark one more point, this time corresponding to your risk, then flying on an Airbus A380 operated by, for example, Lufthansa. This plane is relatively new and was constructed in 2012. So now we should have 3 points. Point 1 is for risk of driving a car from New York to Washington, D.C. Point 2 for flying in a Yak-42 in China, and point 3 for flying in Lufthansa's new Airbus A380. Unfortunately, of course, I can't see what you've written there, but based on thousands of case studies, people I have seen myself and researched by colleagues around the world who regularly treat aerophobia, the points will look like this. Most people will have about 5 to 10% risk for the car journey, approximately 30% on the Yak-42 and just 3% for the Airbus A380. That's what the vast majority of normal people answer. Of course, there are variations. I've seen people put all the risks as 50-50, for example, and I've also seen people who say that Yak-42 is an 80% risk and the Airbus is maybe 25 to 30. It doesn't really matter. Why not? Because almost certainly your numbers are way off. Think about it. If 10% is really the risk of driving from NY to DC, then for every 10 people who make the journey, 1 will die. So if 500,000 people set out on the journey, so 50,000 of them will die. So you are misjudging the risks. If you had a lower risk, just 5%, you are still anticipating 25,000 deaths. If you put the risk at 35%, the death toll is even higher. This is your feeling of risks in your life. and this is a wrong feeling. Now, let's think about the planes. If you assess the risk of Yak 42 at 20%, you're saying that for every 10 yaks that take off today, 2 won't land safely. This is your sense of risk, how you perceive dangers. Of course, you're afraid because of some emotional process or another, so you feel the risk might be 20, 30 or 40%. That would mean that 4 out of 10 people who fly in China in Yak 42 aircraft will die as a result. It's perfectly logical that when we experience a serious phobia, we have a giant re-evaluation of danger. That's why you have numbers like 20%, 40% or whatever for the risks of flying on that Yak 42 airplane. You've all thought of your own number, but if you really think that the risk of Yak 42 crashing is more than something like 0.000001%, it means you have overestimated those risks, and overestimated them by a huge margin, millions or even tens of millions of times. That's a serious miscalculation. In reality, there are about 200 Yak 42s in commercial service today. They make about 600 flights a day. If your guess of 20% was correct, it would mean a Yak 42 was lost every single. But this is not happening. The last commercial operated Yak 42 crash happened 20 years ago. So 600 flights a day times 365 days times 20 years, that's how safe the Yak 42 really is. But that's not what your brain focuses on. In your head, it's a 20% risk, and if you see that risk, of course, you will be afraid of process. This is why the key to treating aerophobia involves understanding that your head comes up with inaccurate thoughts that have nothing to do with reality. The real world is different. In fact, with just 2 or 3 accidents of commercial operations of Yak 42 anywhere in the world for 20 years, it means there cannot be a 20% risk. What you imagine simply isn't there, and that's the basis of the problem. It's the same with the Airbus. If you think there is just 3% risk of Lufthansa Airbus 380 crashing, that means out of every 100 flights, 3 will crash. But today Lufthansa operates 300 aircraft, including more than 200 Airbuses. So you are suggesting that every day Lufthansa loses 6 aircraft. But for the past 30 years, Lufthansa has had only 1 accident with 1 killed passenger. Nobody has even scratched the paintwork of a Lufthansa jet from that accident to now. So, how can your assumption be true? Your assumptions are wrong, and you are attributing too much importance to the wrong things. Let's look at what's happening. You overestimate the risks millions of times over. The left side of your brain, which should deal with logical analysis, doesn't understand what is going on. It sees what we think and what we believe, so what we feel does not match the reality. So your brain shuts down its logical processes completely. You might remember how old Windows used to have an error message on computers. It was, "Your computer performed an illegal operation and will be shut down." That's what happens in your brain. When your mind starts to paint such pictures, to conjure such figures, and then to believe in them, the brain disables the hemisphere that is responsible for rational thought. Only the right hemisphere remains, dealing with emotions, feelings, and images and what-ifs. That's one of the reasons for your fear of flying: risk overestimation.